Hello, I'm Steve Tassi, the board game guy, and I'm here with my Star Wars Rebellion tutorial, Episode 3, Gameplay. If you've already watched Episode 1, then you're familiar with all the different components. If you've watched Episode 2 of my tutorial, then you have the game set up, so now you're ready for gameplay. Before we get into the details of gameplay, an important concept for you to understand is loyalty. Every populous system in the game has a hexagon that can be filled with one faction's loyalty marker. If a system is loyal to you, it works for you and produces ships and other units during the build phase of the game. You want systems to be loyal to you, and whenever possible, you want to deny loyalty to your opponent. Loyalty is a spectrum with the rebellion on one side, neutral in the middle, and the empire on the other side. The loyalty of a system can change over the course of play. A system that contains imperial troops isn't necessarily loyal to the empire, but it is subjugated. So if there's a rebel system that has imperial troops on the ground, then you place the subjugation marker over top of the rebel loyalty marker. It's still loyal to the rebels, but the empire's troops are making that planet produce for the empire. Some missions automatically make a system loyal to you, whereas other missions give you a point of loyalty in a system. So a point of loyalty would go from being loyal to the rebellion to neutral, or from neutral to being loyal to the empire. If a system is already loyal to you, an extra point of loyalty means nothing. The rules for how to play begin on page 6 of the Learn to Play book, and a handy breakdown of a round is on the back page of that same book. The rules reference book is an indexed list of all the rules and an expansion on how they work. The game is played over an unknown number of rounds and ends when one side reaches their victory condition. The Empire wins if they know the location of the rebel base and have ground troops on there with no rebel ground troops on that planet. They also win if they use the Death Star to blow up the rebel base planet, whether they knew it was that or not. The rebels win the moment their reputation marker meets the round marker on the time track. Each round is divided into 3 distinct phases. The assignment phase, in which players choose leaders to go on missions. The command phase, in which players use those assigned leaders to complete the missions. They also use leaders to move their fleets around the board. And then the refresh phase, in which end of round upkeep is done and players prepare for a new round. During the assignment phase, the rebel player will assign leaders from their pool to mission cards from their hand. When they are done assigning all the leaders that they want to, then they are done and the Imperial player will do their assignment phase, assigning their leaders to the mission cards from their hand. Once both sides have finished assignment, the command phase begins. For my first several playthroughs of this game, I thought that during the assignment phase, the rebel player would assign a leader, then the Imperial player, then back to the rebel player, and so on. When in reality, what is meant to happen is the rebel player assigns all of the leaders they want to missions, and then the Imperial player responds by doing the same. To assign a leader to a mission card, the player will play the card face down in front of them and place 1 or 2 leaders on top of that mission. The mission card may have a minimum skill requirement, and the assigned leader or leaders must be able to provide at least that much of the skill in question. If the mission card has a leader's face depicted on it, along with the crossed lightsabers icon, that means that if that specific leader is assigned to that mission and that mission gets opposed, more on opposing missions later, then you automatically get 2 free successes in the opposition roll. Players do not need to assign all of their available leaders to missions during the assignment phase, but only those assigned to missions during that phase get to actually attempt missions. Unassigned leaders can move fleets around, or they can oppose your opponent's missions. During the command phase, players will take turns, starting with the rebels, then the Empire, then the rebels, then the Empire, activating leaders. Once each player has passed on their opportunity to activate another leader, maybe they've run out of leaders, or maybe their leaders have nothing to do, the command phase is over. When it's a player's turn to act during the command phase, they can choose to reveal a mission card and complete it, or they can place an unassigned leader onto the board and move fleets to that leader's new location. To complete a mission, reveal the card and put the leader or leaders in an appropriate system on the map. The mission cards will tell you what type of system meets the requirement for that mission. It might say any remote system or any populous system or a system with rebel units in it, etc. Then you will either attempt or resolve the mission. A resolve mission automatically succeeds. There is nothing that your opponent can do to stop you from a resolve mission. If it's an attempt mission, then your opponent may choose to send a leader to oppose that mission. In order to do so, that leader must have at least 1 point of any required skill that is on the mission card, and then players will roll dice. Each player rolls 1 die for each point of skill that their leader or leaders have in the skill required by the mission, and the player with more successes wins. If you're using the expansion content and your leaders have small skill icons, they roll 1 green die for each of those. Why might you choose to oppose or not oppose a mission? The only reason to oppose a mission is that you don't want your enemy to succeed at things. You just don't want that to happen. But there are many reasons to not oppose any given mission. You have limited resources, and you may have other plans for the leader or leaders that are capable of opposing this particular mission. The system where the mission is happening might be one where you intend to move fleets out of that round. And if you put a leader there, your fleet will no longer be able to leave that system. There is an exception to that rule, and that is if the leader in question does not have tactics numbers, then it cannot command a fleet, therefore it does not prevent fleets from moving. If the mission fails, the leaders stay where they are until the refresh phase, and the mission card is discarded or returned to the player's hand if it's a starting mission card. If the mission succeeds, however, follow the instructions on the card. Missions do all sorts of things. It might allow you to add loyalty to a system, or build extra units, or damage units on your enemy's build queue. The mission cards explicitly state what their effects are. Remember, your 4 starting mission cards, those are the ones with the yellow arrows on the bottom, will return to your hand instead of being discarded at the end of that mission, whether it succeeds or fails. Because of the many, many different mission cards, there are lots of edge cases that could show up in your first playthrough of the game, but probably won't. And this video would be ridiculously long if I went through every single mission card and explained exactly what it does. Just know that the mission cards do a very good job of explaining what they do on them. So read your mission cards. And look to the rules reference book if there's anything on the card that you don't understand. Even though it's beyond the scope of this video to analyze every single mission card, it is important for you to understand the 4 starting missions that each side begins the game with. On the Rebel side, we have Build Alliance. This requires 1 point of diplomacy skill, and it is attempted in any populous system, so anything that has a hexagon space. If there are rebel units in the system when it is attempted, then if it's opposed, the player attempting the mission gets to roll 2 extra dice. If this mission is successful, you gain 1 loyalty in the system. Sabotage. This takes 1 combat skill, and you may attempt it in any system. If you are successful, you may destroy a shield bunker in this system, or if it is a populous system, you place a sabotage marker over top of the build icons. This is the expansion version of the card. If you are playing with just the base game, you do not have the destroy a shield bunker option. Rapid mobilization. This requires 1 logistics skill. It is resolved in the rebel base space. It works a little differently from the other missions that you have, so it's the most complicated. At the end of the command phase, choose one of the two following effects. If the rebel base has not been revealed by the end of the command phase, you may move up to 5 units from one system to the rebel base, ignoring the normal adjacency rules. The other option, if the base has been exposed, is you immediately establish a new rebel base. If 2 leaders were placed on this mission, then you get to draw 8 probe cards instead of the normal 4. Infiltration. This mission requires 1 intel skill. It is attempted in any system that contains an Imperial unit, and if the rebel player is successful, they will look at the top 2 cards of their objective deck, choose to put 1 on the bottom, and put 1 back on top. On the Imperial side, we have Gather Intel. This takes 1 intel. It is attempted in any rebel system, and if it is successful, the Imperial player draws 1 probe card for every 4 rebel units that are on the rebel base space. Minimum 1 card, so even if the base space is empty, you still get 1 probe card. Capture a rebel operative. This takes 1 combat skill. You may attempt it against any rebel leader that is in a system that contains Imperial units. If you are successful, you have captured that rebel leader. Rule by Fear is a 1 point of diplomacy skill mission. You may attempt it in any populous system that contains an Imperial unit. If you are successful, you gain 1 loyalty in that system. And Research and Development. This is a 1 logistics mission. Resolve it in any system that has Imperial loyalty, and you may choose to do one of the following things. Number 1, you may draw 2 project cards, choosing 1 to keep and 1 to place on the bottom of the project deck, or you may choose to remove a sabotage marker from that system and draw 1 project card into your hand. Instead of completing a mission during your turn on the command phase, you may use an unassigned leader to move fleets around the board. To do so, place a leader that has tactics numbers into a system that is adjacent to systems that contain your units. You may then move units from any or all of the adjacent systems to the location of that leader. All Rebel spaceships and most Imperial ones can move under their own power when a leader calls on them, but ground units and TIE fighters need to be carried from system to system. Larger ships have a carrying capacity that's on the reference board, and that allows them to move smaller units. If you do not have enough capacity to move all of your units, you have to pick and choose which ones will go and which ones will stay where they are. Every unit that needs carrying takes 1 space of carrying capacity, regardless of whether it's an AT-AT, a TIE fighter, or a rebel troop. Remember that you are not allowed to move units out of a system where you already have a leader who has tactics numbers in place. When a fleet moves to a new system, immediately deposit any ground troops that were being transported onto the planet, regardless of whether or not there's any enemy presence in that system. If this means that the Empire now has ground units on the planet that is the location of the Rebel base, the Rebel player must immediately admit that. Revealing the hidden base. The moment Imperial ground troops land on the planet that holds the secret base, the Rebel player reveals the probe card and immediately moves any Rebel forces from the base space at the side of the board onto the actual system space on the map. Moving the hidden base. The Rebel player can move their base to a new system by playing the Rapid Mobilization mission card. At the end of the command phase in which they resolved the mission, if the base has been revealed, or if it's still hidden but the player wants to move its location anyway, the Rebel player draws 4 cards off the top of the probe deck and selects a new system for the base from those cards. If they assigned 2 leaders to the mission, they get to draw 8 cards instead. Any drawn systems that currently have Imperial units on them are ineligible to be chosen as the new location. If all of the drawn cards are currently Imperial occupied, then the rebel player cannot relocate the base this turn. All rebel forces present on the old base system remain in that system. If the rebel player is vacating a base that was still a secret, all the units on the rebel base space are moved to the system space on the map. It's not advisable to abandon a lot of troops in this manner, but sometimes it's better to abandon troops than it is to risk destruction. Whether the base ends up moving or not, the rebel player shuffles the probe cards, except the one for the new base location, back into the probe deck, moving to and from the hidden rebel base. Sometimes you just have to get units to the base to defend it, or off the base to get them to an active battlefield. To move units onto the base, place an unassigned leader with tactics numbers in the system that holds the base, and then you are free to move fleets that are adjacent to the hidden base's system into that system. The units are publicly in the system, but you haven't actually revealed to the Empire that the base is there. It is possible to move units to the base in such a way that they are removed from the map board and placed directly on the base space. Put an unassigned fleet leader on the base space, and then you can move units from neighboring systems to that space. The unit's whereabouts are no longer known to the Empire, but depending on the board state and just how many fleets you move from surrounding systems, you may have given away your hidden location. To move units from the base, place an unassigned leader with tactics numbers in a system that is adjacent to the system that holds the hidden base. You may now move units off the base space and into the leader's system. Doing this will usually give the Empire a good idea of where your base is. When a fleet moves into a new system and there are enemy units in that system, combat begins. Combat is fought as alternating rounds of space and ground combat. A new fleet moves in, deploys its ground troops to the planet, and then a round of space combat begins between the aggressor fleet that just moved in and whatever space units were in the territory to begin with. If the defending player does not currently have a leader in that system, they have the option of using one of their unassigned leaders to join the fight and lead those troops in battle. In the base game, without a leader in the fight, the player is not allowed to draw or play tactics cards. With the expansion, if you don't have a leader in the fight, you are not allowed to make any rerolls. Each player picks which of their leaders in the system is leading the fight and draws the corresponding number of tactics cards based on the proper tactics number on that leader. Remember, blue for space, orange for ground. The combat begins with a space battle only if both players have space units in the system. The player who moved their fleet into the system is the aggressor, and they will make their attack roll, and then, once that's resolved, the defender will respond by making their attack roll. Once the space combat round is done, we move on to the ground combat. If both sides have ground units in play, then there will be a ground battle that is determined in the same way as the space battle was, but this time using ground tactics cards. The attacker makes their roll, then the defender responds. After both a space and ground battle have occurred, then players get the opportunity to retreat from the fight. To attack, look at all of your units in the battle and add up the dice that they allow you to roll, a maximum of 5 red and 5 black to be rolled. Roll those dice and check the results. A hit allows you to assign a point of damage to units that take the corresponding color of damage. A direct hit lets you assign a point of damage to any unit. A crossed lightsabers symbol allows you to draw an additional tactics card or play a premium tactics card. After you roll your dice, draw and play any cards that you can, then assign your damage points to the enemy. Then the defender will respond by rolling their dice, playing any tactic cards that they can, and assigning their damage. Tactics cards with the crossed lightsaber symbol on them are called premium cards, and you can only play one from your hand if you expend a die that you rolled that battle that has the crossed lightsaber symbol on it. Other tactics cards have no cost to play. Tactics cards say on them what they do. They might allow you to re-roll dice, block damage, prevent your opponent from blocking damage, and so on. Read your tactics cards. Once the attack and counterattacks have been resolved, any unit that has taken damage equal to or exceeding its hit level is destroyed. It's removed from the battle and returned to the player's supply of pieces. Then the aggressor and the defender are given in turn the opportunity to retreat from the fight. If either retreats, then the fight is probably totally over. If neither is willing to or able to retreat, then the fight continues with a new round of space combat, followed by ground combat, followed by the opportunity to retreat. Retreating is done by moving your leader and as many units as you can out of the combat system and into an adjacent system. There are some restrictions on retreating. Number 1, a player without a leader in the fight cannot retreat. Number 2, an Imperial player with a Death Star in the fight cannot retreat.
Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances.
Number 3, you must follow the transport capacity rules, so it is possible that you will be forced to leave units behind. 4, if possible, you must retreat into a friendly system. That is, a system with your units present or your loyalty. If that is not possible, you may retreat into an adjacent system as long as your opponent doesn't have units or loyalty there, and it isn't a system that your opponent just moved a fleet into your current system in order to launch the attack from. Depending on the board state, it is possible that the player who wants to retreat will be unable to. Things probably aren't going well for you if you are unable to retreat. If the retreat can't happen, and the other player doesn't want to or is also unable to retreat, another round of combat ensues. A retreat by one side or the other usually results in the end of the combat, but due to transport carrying restrictions, it is possible that the retreating force had to leave some units behind, in which case they have to continue fighting until they're eliminated. Combat is over when one side has no more units in the fight.
In the base game, rebel forces have the ability to build structures such as the shield generator and the ion cannon. These are defensive structures that do not roll attack dice themselves, but have another effect. Each shield generator you have in a battlefield allows you to draw one ground tactics card at the start of each round of ground battle. For each ion cannon you have in a field of battle, your opponent will roll 2 fewer red dice during the space battle. If you're using the expansion, shield generators work slightly differently. Because you don't draw cards during combat, what the shield generator does is let you retrieve an expended tactics card and put it back in your hand.
Some rebel objective cards are combat objectives. When a combat ends, if the requirements of the card have been met, for example, destroy a Death Star, or destroy a Star Destroyer, or win a fight that was instigated by the Empire, etc., the card gets revealed and the rebel reputation token moves down the time track number of spaces equal to the value of the objective card. The rebels are not allowed to score more than 1 combat objective card per round of play. So it doesn't matter how many combats they win, 1 card per round. After each side has moved all the fleets that they can or want to, and has tried to complete all the missions that they can or want to, the command phase is over. Any unrevealed missions that a player still has at that point are put back in their hand, and the leaders that were assigned to them return to their pool. After the command phase is done, we move on to the refresh phase. The first thing that happens in the refresh phase is that the rebel player can reveal an objective card that is a refresh objective. For example, the rebels have units in 4 rebel systems. They have loyalty in every populous system in a region, etc. The rebel player can only score 1 refresh objective per turn. It is possible that the rebel player will get to score a combat and a refresh objective in the same round. After scoring any objective card that the rebel player can qualify for, then the rest of the refresh phase steps are followed in order. For ease of reference, they are listed on the back page of the Learn to Play book. Number 1, reclaim your leaders. Any captured rebel leaders stay on the board, but all other leaders are returned to their players' pools. 2, draw cards. Each player draws 2 new mission cards. Remember, you have a 10-card limit, So if drawing those cards puts you above 10, you must discard down to your limit of 10. The Rebel player will draw an objective card, and the Imperial player will draw 2 probe deck cards and make notes of which systems those are.
Number 3. Advance the time marker 1 space.
If it hasn't met the Rebel reputation marker, resolve the time track actions on the time marker's new space. If there's a recruit icon, then each player will draw 2 new action cards, pick one to put on the bottom of their action deck and the other to use to recruit a new leader. If there is a build icon, each player will look at every planet that is loyal to them or subjugated by them, and they will add new units to the build queue. Loyal planets provide a new unit for each unit symbol on the planet, but subjugated planets only produce a new unit for the first symbol. The second one is ignored. Sabotage systems do not provide any new units. Each system has a number 1, 2, or 3 next to it on the board, and that tells you which space of your build queue you will place these new units. The unit symbols on the systems correspond to your unit types on your player reference board. Rebel player, don't forget that your Rebel base also produces 2 units for you during build turns. The last step of the refresh phase is to deploy your new units. Starting with the Rebel player, both players will slide all of their units on their build queue down 1 space. So everything that's on the 1 space slides off the board and is going to get deployed. Everything that's on the 2 slides down to the 1, and everything that's on the 3 slides down to the 2 space. When deploying new units, you must follow the following rules. Firstly, you can only deploy units to a system where you have loyalty or subjugation. Secondly, you cannot deploy into systems that contain enemy units. Thirdly, you may not deploy more than 2 new units per system. If the planet that secretly houses the Rebel base is also publicly loyal to the rebellion, then the Rebel player is allowed to place 2 new units on the system space on the board, as well as 2 new units on the Rebel base space. If you cannot deploy all of your new units, place any that were not deployed back on the number 1 space, and maybe you'll get to deploy them next time. If you're using the expansion, the Imperial player is also allowed to deploy troops to any remote system that has a shield bunker built on it. That's the end of the refresh phase, and a new round begins with the Rebel player performing the assignment phase. Continue playing until one side has reached its victory condition. Here are a few last-minute reminders of things that have gone wrong in some of my past plays. The Rebel player completes their assignment phase entirely before the Imperial player starts. You don't go back and forth, one assignment. It's Rebel player assigns everything they're going to do, then the Imperial player assigns all of their leaders. The Imperial player must be informed about the location of the Rebel base immediately upon landing any ground troops there, even if it's just a single unit. Leaders without tactics numbers do not prevent your fleet from moving, but also cannot cause a fleet to move. They also can't command one in battle. If you are playing with just the base game, you will not need the rest of this video, as it explains the differences between the regular game and the expansion. So, good luck, have fun, may the Force be with you.
The Force will be with you, always.
Gameplay changes if you are using the Rise of the Empire expansion. Green dice. The expansion comes with green dice, which have several uses. As mentioned earlier, expansion leaders with small skill icons get to roll the green dice during opposed missions. Green dice are also used in combat. If you have a unit in the fight that uses green dice, you roll those instead of red or black. The Rebel Vanguard and the Nebulon B frigate, for example, as well as the Imperial TIE Striker and the Battle Tank. Green dice have nothing but blank sides and direct hits, so they don't hit as frequently as red or black dice do, but they're more flexible because every hit is a direct hit. Tactics cards and numbers. In the base game, players draw tactics cards from a communal pool. In the expansion, each player has their own set of space tactics cards and ground tactics cards. When a first battle erupts, you have all 9 of each of them available to you, but as you play them, your tactical options dwindle and dwindle until you've played all 9 of your cards, at which point you get them all back. Each tactics card has 2 listed effects. The first, more powerful one that you can only choose to use if you have the appropriate unit in play in the battle. For example, the bombing run card lets you do more damage if you have Y-wings in the fight, but you still get to do damage if you have no Y-wings. If, for some reason, you want to, you may always choose to use the secondary effect instead of the primary, more powerful one, even if you're entitled to use the more powerful one. Because Leader's tactics numbers are no longer related to how you draw cards, what they do instead is allow you to re-roll combat dice. So after you make your attack roll, you may choose to re-roll as many of your dice as your Leader's tactic number for that type of combat, space or ground. You must make all your desired rerolls at once. Crossed lightsabers in combat. Because the new tactics cards are not drawn, you don't need to spend those crossed lightsabers in order to draw new cards or play cards. Instead, what they let you do is repair damage that has been done to your units by your enemy. For each one you spend, you remove one damage token from one of your units. Targets. Target tokens go with certain objective and mission cards. The art on the card corresponds to the art on the token, so it's easy to find the right target tokens for the card in question. When playing the card, you deploy the target token or tokens to the appropriate system or systems as indicated by the card. Some targets have to be cleared off the board by the Imperial player and others by the Rebel player, as per the card's instructions. To clear a target, you must have ground units in the system and have no enemy units in that system. If a system is destroyed, it also removes its target from the board. Shield bunkers are an Imperial structure that have the easy deployment ability. During the deployment phase, the Imperial player is allowed to deploy units to a system that has a shield bunker in it. They must still follow all the other deployment restrictions. You are now prepared to play Star Wars Rebellion with the Rise of the Empire expansion. Good luck. May the Force be with you. I'm Steve Tassi, the Board Game Guy. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more board game tutorials and general gaming advice.
The Force will be with you, always.